Welcome to another episode of Tidbits of Preservation with the Boston Preservation Alliance. Joining me today is Marita Rivero, the former president and CEO of the Museum of African American History in Boston and Nantucket. Marita is also the former board chair of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. She has a long history in public broadcasting here in Boston, including in GBH and elsewhere. An amazing leader in the cultural community of Boston for a long time, highly awarded and recognized. And we're so pleased, Marita, that you're able to join us today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. It's good. It's a good topic.
Yeah, well, it's great. And obviously, it's an interesting time. This is the first time we've talked since recent events have really put us in a new place, a new context. So what's been running through your mind as all this has been happening?
Well, I'm old enough to have seen pieces of this before. But truthfully, I've never seen anything like this. I am so impressed by the ethnic, racial mix of the people demonstrating. I'll say that was a surprise to me, and an emotional. It was an emotional surprise. I had the feeling we were out here alone, so it was wonderful to look up and see no. Actually, there are thousands of people all across the country and around the world who are aware and interested in seeing some sorts of positive change. It's just been a moment. And none of us are going to forget this.
No, and hopefully we won't be able to forget it because it will cause some real change. It has been remarkable in terms of the diversity of people. And there's a new generation of people that have climbed on board and said, like, we're not doing this the same way anymore, which is really remarkable. What role do you think preservation has in this story? What role do you think the work of the preservation community has played in getting us to the good places we are, but also played a part in getting us to the places that need to be fixed?
I'm somebody who believes history is important. Unfortunately, the education we all received in this country is very poor when it comes to understanding history, whether we were in public schools or private schools. And I hate to say this, our major U.S. top universities are as culpable in this area as anyone else. So we are walking around as a nation in ignorance, and it forces us, I think, to take on some kind of personal responsibility, to go back and really do some reading, a little bit here, a little bit there, to test our own assumptions about race particularly, and to reimagine who we might want to be. So the preservation community has a wonderful opportunity to play a role there that our formal educational institutions have not played or have stumbled on. We're just going to have to make sure as a community that we look at what we have in front of us and see whether we can broaden the stories we're already telling. We have work we've already done. What are we doing? What are we talking about? There might be more juice we can really squeeze out of places we've already invested in if we thought about it. And then we need to push ourselves to be clear about where we're going. We set goals for any other thing we want to do. So if we really want to set goals related to Black Lives Matter, we want to set goals in that area that have to do with a common understanding and how our own history fits into decision-making now, we can do that.
I think that's true. Maybe we can talk about some specific examples. I mean, some of the things I've been thinking about recently is really the challenge of perspective. Sometimes things that I've looked at a certain way based on my training and my history and my background and being white. Let's give a specific example. The Faneuil Hall. Let's talk about that one for So there's been, I don't need to tell you, a call to change the name of Faneuil Hall because of Peter Faneuil's background and connection to the slave trade. And, candidly, my initial reaction was, well, it's been Faneuil Hall all along. That's part of its story. Why should we change that? and this discussion of changing calls for changing it to name it after Crispus Attucks was an important figure who's not recognized enough. And my initial reaction was, no, we shouldn't do that. We should just add on to the story, continue. But part of me is like, well, maybe, I don't know, maybe that's a discussion we should have. We shouldn't just discount some of these discussions, which I don't know if I would have said that 6 months ago. But I don't know what your opinion, and again, I think part of the challenge is we don't want to erase parts of history that teach us something, right. But when are those parts of history, misaligned with who we want to recognize and honor? So I'm curious your thoughts about that.
My answer specifically to Faneuil Hall is that it's kind of what we crafted when I was at the National Trust, and people asked about taking down Confederate statues, right? And my feeling is that there's no kind of national mandate, that no one federally is going to show up and start telling you what to take down and what to preserve. These are local discussions. So there should be local discussions about a Faneuil Hall. And decisions made kind of come out of that. And even if there's no decision made, the fact that one begins to have a discussion has real value to a community. My starting point in that specific case was that Mr. Faneuil was dead by the time the hall opened. So it began as a gathering place for abolitionists, Black and white. And it was a very important part of the Black and white, and certainly Black abolitionist history in Boston. So I was less concerned about how he made his money than what actually happened in Faneuil Hall. But I think the point is, again, how we tell the story. So whether we put up plaques or an art installation or or have seminars, we need to make sure that the full history of Mr. Faneuil and the hall is available to anybody going there in as big letters as we can. You get a great big statue, great big sign. So I think telling the story of these places is critical. And eventually a local community might say in the discussion, we don't want to change that name. They might talk and say, we still don't want to change the name, but we want a big installation that talks about what happened here. What's important to me is that A, you have the discussion, and B, whatever your decision is, you have some expository narrative that explains honestly what happened there. If you ask very broadly, using Faneuil Hall as a specific example, what I think the basic question is credibility. We're in the information business as preservationists, and we are in fact handing over history. It's important to us to be credible, as it should be to a journalist, to an historian. That's part of our business. So the question to us is, who matters to us? If we're going to be credible, who's the audience for that credibility? And I would say, looking at the marches, there are far more people of far more races and ethnicities who are interested in that question of credibility than we might have assumed had we just thought Black people have to think we're terrific. Because obviously that hasn't moved the needle. Whatever Black people think has not moved the needle. But now we have a much broader set of people whose credibility may matter to us.
Right. I think a lot of people don't realize, or now are coming to realize, or just never really thought about the fact that, all our history is filtered. We're never telling all the stories. Every book you read, even, history books by great scholars, they don't tell every little intimate piece. You never get the book written. So, how you choose, how you filter. And we've been filtering out an awful lot of great stories about great people.
I was looking at a mansion somewhere. It was a wonderful mansion, went through the whole thing, and no one ever mentioned where the money came from. By 1900, the United States, America, was one of the wealthiest countries in the world. By then, the money had been laundered through banks. It was now venture capital. We were building transcontinental railroads. We had gold rushes. We had La Belle Epoque. We had, the robber barons. We had all that history that we know, and then we were all celebrating American ingenuity and No one mentions where the money came from. So sometimes something just that simple needs to be said.
Right. Well, and here in New England for a long time, we've said, they were merchants, they were shippers. They made their money in trade.
Trade.
With no real clarity on being culpable and an integral part of the slave system because it wasn't here.
They're acts of omission. If you don't talk about some of that, then the obvious point is that Black people, they're lazy, or they don't know how to manage things. They don't have good judgment. They can't work. Everybody else built up the country. Why didn't they? My relatives are, immigrants. So if you don't start talking more broadly by mission, you damage people. I feel in the end, despite my frankness right now, I think we should back off trying to lecture one another. Or white people need to stop lecturing one another about who knows more, has known more, who's on top of this. Let's just not do that. Let's presume that we all have a great deal to learn and set about, as I said, establishing some goals for ourselves so that we can become informed and can move closer to the the broader history you mentioned that we're hoping to convey.
Yes, I think this is a time for listening,
learning,
and reaching out to new people to learn from. I think is one of my big takeaways. So, are you optimistic or pessimistic about where we are and about the role of preservation in moving forward?
Some days I'm very optimistic, and other days I think, once this is over, we're not going to do anything. I believe there are enough people who probably want to dig a space for themselves that they can commit to. That I'm optimistic about. Nationally, I'm thinking, let's get one huge policy change in place. 1, 2 maybe, that'll be a miracle. Locally, individually, let's just increase what we consider, by 2%. And let's say in this space we're talking about, let me add 2%, and I'm just going to dig in and make sure my board or my PTA or my community association or my vendors or my reading, I'm going to commit to personally just dealing with what's right here in front of me and trying to let that teach me and make a difference in more people's lives. I'm optimistic about that.
Great. Well, I think optimism is the best way to be. We're going to move forward and hopefully build upon what's happening and what continues to happen. I feel like we could talk about this all afternoon, but we are calling these tidbits of preservation. So I'm hoping you'd be willing to join us again a little down the road as we see how some of this stuff shakes out and hopefully, builds a strong momentum and we actually see some changes and can actually implement some things that tell a better story, tell a more holistic story.
Tell a better story. I'm happy to do that.
Great. Well, thank you for your time today, and you be well, and we'll keep on marching forward.